Today on Legitimate Cybersecurity, we're joined by Austin Berglis, former Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI's cyber branch in New York, where he led major takedowns of dark web marketplaces such as Silk Road and Silk Road 2.0. His work redefined what's possible in cybercrime investigations, proving that even the darkest corners of the internet aren't beyond reach. Now at BlueVoyant as Global Head of Professional Services, Austin helps major organizations stay ahead of today's evolving cyber threats.
We're really lucky today to have Austin with us. He is, as awesome as you can kind of get in this field, in this line of work, specifically because the difference I like to give sometimes is Dustin, myself, and Austin all did really cool stuff. The difference is Austin gets to talk about it.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on. We've got a few questions that I know a lot of people like to, I'm sure you've heard before, but no one ever gets tired of hearing. And the first one is, you worked in the FBI, which is not something that, I'd say everyone thinks of or can even approach in their time, in their lifetime. What made you want to work in the FBI, and how did you end up in basically taking on cyber when you got in?
Yes. So I'll give you a little history. When I graduated college, I did ROTC and I got commissioned in the Army, and I spent 6 years in the Army, and then was planning on retiring, doing 20 years. But I had my first kid, and I was gone all the time. So I wanted to stay in government service. So applied for the FBI, and about a year later was heading to Quantico, and again, just wanted to stay government service. That's what I wanted to do with my life. But needed something a bit more stable.
I like that government service element. What was it about government service that drew you to it? Like, how'd you know that's what you wanted to do with your life? I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I still am not entirely sure, to be perfectly blunt. Like, how did you know that service is what you wanted to do? And was there any kind of defining event?
No, there really wasn't. I like all of us, had really no idea, growing up. There were so many things that I wanted to be and do. But I had a teacher in high school, who was a Vietnam vet, and he talked to me about, Army stuff. And, I was thinking about going to West Point. And then he talked to me about the benefits of doing ROTC.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get a scholarship, so they paid for my school, which was wonderful. And did ROTC through college, and just really liked the camaraderie. You guys know it from your backgrounds. You just have a different work experience, kind of trusting the guys and gals who are to the left and right of you.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes when your life depends on it, it's a different mindset. So I really loved it. I would have stayed in the Army for my whole life. If my trajectory in my life was a little different, I probably would still be there, but knew that, even though I was leaving the Army, wanted to keep that kind of camaraderie and an experience that you can only get from government service, that you try to replicate in the private sector. And I think that the three of us working together, and others have done so, but you really can't replicate it without having that mission focused mindset.
I like that. I like the teacher aspect. Big shout out to teachers, because for some reason in society, we like to underpay them and beat them.
Yes.
And they're still nice to our kids and give them dreams.
Yes.
So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think I had teachers tell me that I needed to go into the military, but I think probably for completely different reasons than you, Austin. So, good on that teacher.
It was a good thing. I mean, it was, I definitely found a niche there in government service. Hope maybe someday I'll get back there, but it's It's great.
Once you got into the FBI, what made you? Did anything specific draw you to cybersecurity, or did you just kind of fall into that? How did that kind of happen?
Yeah. So I got into the bureau in pre 9/11 days, 1999, and
Just in time.
just in time for the activities. Cyber was different, especially the way that government looked at it. We had no idea, or we had a little inkling that China and Russia were robbing us blind, but we didn't know how to address it. We didn't have the visibility necessary. So we focused on things like the Bureau focused heavily on like intellectual property rights violations and trademark infringement. And obviously the internet was changing a lot with the anonymity capabilities that were coming through. But pre 9/11 days in the late 90s, it was basic. It was still Yahoo bulletin boards and
all Vista.
Yeah, right. So my first job out of the academy, I joined a crimes against children squad, and for the first 7+ years of my career, I did undercover ops, posing as a minor, doing undercover cases. That was my first foray into understanding how the internet worked. When I joined the bureau, we didn't have cell phones. We had pagers. We had one 486 computer, a 386, maybe a 486 computer that we all shared. We didn't have email. Learning from, I had a computer scientist that I worked with, and he set up an undercover network. We backstopped it. So I really learned about how the internet worked, and more importantly, how to anonymize yourself on the internet and do that. That was my foray into the internet. We took a big break during 9/11. Obviously, everyone worked counterterrorism. And then when I came back and continued with child exploitation a few years later, I looked to get into management, and I was promoted, and I took over the only cyber squad that was in New York at the time. And that's when I really got some life lessons. So yeah.
So you started out like posing as a minor online, like straight Chris Hansen style, catching those predators and stuff.
Oh yeah, I had a personality. I had a name. I had a backstory. I had a source that worked for me. She was a grandmom that lived out in Long Island, and she had a voice that sounded like a young girl. So at midnight, I was chatting with these guys, and I would call her up and say they want to talk on the phone, and I would get her, and I'd set up a tape recorder, and she would know my backstory, and we worked cases together. She's testified. So unfortunately that it's a horrific crime.
Right.
We were able to do some incredible work there. Can't do it for very long. I mean, 7 years was pushing it. So I had to move on.
Your first introduction to technology. I don't know if anybody has, if either of you have seen the first season of The Wire, but they show the Baltimore
very
PD,
first season,
and they've got typewriters still, right? And we're into the 90s at that point, I think, right? Maybe late 90s, early 2000s, where they might have had one computer. I'm just surprised to hear that the FBI maybe was similar kind of area technologically speaking, as far as what they had, as far as capabilities go. So the one, did you only have like one true computer scientist who was on staff there, or was there like a whole bunch of them, but they were just kind of out, hanging out with different units?
So at the time when I started in the late 90s, we had one computer scientist.
Okay.
He was assigned to the computer crime squad. I borrowed him because I was on the violent crime squad doing child exploitation. And then fast forward, when I was running the cyber program in 2009, I built the program out from just one squad to 5 squads, hired more computer scientists, more analysts. So now the Bureau hires computer scientists. We were kind of a
Sure.
pioneer in that world, but we learned very, very quickly that, number one, there's not a lot of FBI agents out there anyway. To find FBI agents that are so technical, that can run some of these very, very technical investigations is rare. We train investigators, and an investigator can go do a white collar case, can do a cyber case, can do a violent crime case. You have to become an expert in that area, but investigations are investigations, right? You run them. But
Right.
what we learned is that we needed deep, deep expertise to do data Title IIIs and wiretaps and forensics and all the stuff that you need to do. Computer scientists they were force multipliers times 10.
Yeah. And so in that same vein, like, was there that much of a difference when you really broke it down to the forensic science of it, between like tapping a phone versus, running a trace, or tracing a line versus like tracing an IP or something like that? Was there really that big of a difference, or was it kind of the same SOPs and then standard operating procedures, and then, you would have to bring in the computer scientists to explain the avenues of how that worked?
Well, like trap and traces, pen trap and traces are basic investigative techniques. I remember putting a tap on a phone. That's Bureau 101.
Yeah.
I remember my squad ran the first data wiretap, where we actually tapped.
That's awesome.
It was almost like it was a Jabber server, so it was like a phone booth.
Oh yeah.
And our guys who in the FBI, they're part of the operational technology division. They're out putting wiretaps on telephones left and right. No one knew how to do this. You needed a computer scientist to figure out how to do this, how to configure it, how to minimize the communications, and then how to digest the data we're getting and then figure out what we're looking at. You needed someone with a lot of technical expertise there. That was part of a big case that we ran with Citibank.
So you're growing from, doing the first data wiretap, right, to after a certain amount of time, you're taking down Silk Rev, not just once, but like twice, and leading the operations that brought those down. What was it like operating inside a platform that was inherently designed to be anonymous and untraceable, wherein you're not supposed to know anybody? You're not supposed to, the whole point is to, hide yourself.
Yeah.
How was it going from that to that? And did you find the transition, let's be honest, right? Tor has its own whole background, and it's a humdinger, as one would say. The onion router, for those of you who are unfamiliar, and it's the backbone of a lot of the dark web. How was it? What was that process like? And then was it, I imagine it's going to be a bit more arduous, right? When you're talking about an organization that was on pagers maybe 10 years beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't remember like I would show up in the office and all of a sudden, Tor was there, or the dark web. It was a slow bleed.
Yeah.
It was a slow bleed, and we ran investigations that started to have aspects not only of operations in this thing called the dark web, but use of like cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins on, I remember doing investigations, and one of my agents came in and were like, there's this thing called Bitcoins, and it was like trading at like, $2 a piece.
Yeah, the good old days.
Yeah. He was like, even 90 cents. Oh, I think I'm going to buy some of this. I'm like, it's going to be worth nothing. Like if I had fast forward back to that time and bought, just what I was going to spend on a pizza that day,
Right.
I wouldn't be talking to you guys. But it was like, we ran a fake forum on the dark web. We were doing all kinds of traditional investigations that all of a sudden couldn't work anymore. Like Silk Road was a perfect example of it, because when we got involved in Silk Road, it was because the prosecutor's office in Southern District of New York came to us. We were essentially the preeminent cyber squad in the bureau. We were doing all kinds of great cases, and they had been trying to break into Silk Road for quite some time using traditional techniques. DEA doing undercover buys.
Yeah.
Basically, you can do an undercover buy on a buyer, but that's all you get. You can't get anywhere else, right? So we needed to come up with some sort of technical solution to dismantle that. And the only way to dismantle it is cut the heart out, find out who this Dread Pirate Roberts guy is. And that's how you dismantle it. You can pick off a seller selling a bag of weed every single day, but it's the difference between, doing a street buy and disrupting, the kingpin who's running that corner. And that's how we had to get at it. And there was massive blockades there, mainly because of Tor.
Isn't that the goal though, for like every investigation like that? You can get the guy, selling dime bags on the street, but the point is to try to get someone to turn over so you can get the next highest guy, the next highest guy, the next highest guy, or gal.
That's how Batman does it, right?
Yeah, it's Dustin, you're right. Like, before kind of the transition from like when I was talking about, we were doing like intellectual property rights cases, copyright infringement. Then we started to get into money mule investigations where guys were banging out fake ATM machines, fake cards and stealing money. And the way you break into that is you grab a mule, you arrest a mule, then you find out who the money boss is, like who are they giving their money to. Then you find out who that money boss is working with, who the money man is. And then you work your way up to the coder who actually wrote the code.
Wow. That
allows the loosely knit but yet affiliated cybercriminal group to get a batch of Citibank cards, figure out the algorithm to say, I'm going to then generate the next 1,000 Citibank cards, then code with a magnet swiper the next 1,000 cards on blank ATM cards and hand them out to the money mules, and they're going to run around and start banging ATM machines. You got to work your way up that level. It's the same way in a drug investigation. You get the guy selling a bag on the street, you go to his dealer, and then you work your way up to the kingpin. That's how you dismantle organizations.
So in a way then, what you had to do for the Silk Road, investigatively speaking, did it simplify that process then? Because you just had to go after the main guy.
Yeah. It simplified it it took it away from a traditional investigation. Traditional investigation wouldn't work. The only way to do it was a technical solution. You had to get the computer scientists that helped me back in 1999 or 2000 set up the Undercover network on a DSL line and then a T3 line is the same, and the same guy who did the Title III for a data Title III is the same guy that did all the technical work on the Silk Road case. Same
awesome.
Scientist.
Yeah, that's great.
It was interesting because it flipped itself on its head. It started out with a technical solution because we had to start getting in technically, but then it went to a traditional solution where we had to start using sophisticated, unsophisticated techniques once we had a subject, a guy, once we figured out who we thought it was. And we had to start putting the pieces together and really doing an investigation.
Well, when you were doing it, was there like a moment where you realized, hey, especially with 2.0, where you realized, hey, we've actually got him. We've got enough to, bring him in, arrest and so forth. And what was that like?
Yeah, with Ulbricht, Ross Ulbricht, who was DPR, it was a year. So we got called in 2012, and I opened up a case, and we opened up a case in 2012, the FBI in New York, and it wasn't until a year later that we ID'd him, and it was a combination of things. It was, unbeknownst to us, IRS was investigating, him, was taking a look at him. Department of Homeland Security was HSI at the time was looking at him for, not him, but an individual. No one had gotten a name yet. But basically the way we got to it was, the IRS was investigating somebody who was using the name Altoid to post on drug forums, indicating that they were going to start up this website, which turned out to be Silk Road. Little while later, Altoid posted on some forums looking for programming help because he wasn't technical. And then the contact address he used was ross.ulbricht@gmail.com.
No way.
Yeah. And then he changed.
Scholar.
But it's interesting. It's so always breadcrumbs. Criminals will always leave breadcrumbs, no matter how smart you are. They're always going to leave the breadcrumbs. Then he changed his name to Frosty. He was using Frosty, but you forget completely, that 5 years ago you posted your email address looking for programming help. It was leading a breadcrumb trail. Fast forward to us figuring out that the back end of the Silk Road server was in Iceland. We seized it, ripped it apart, and in the code said Frosty at Frosty.
Whoops.
Right. So then we did some work on ross.ulbricht@gmail.com. All the returns came back to an address in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, it was the same address where a bunch of fake IDs were delivered to. And it was a block away from the last known login into the admin panel in Silk Road.
Oh, wow.
So now we have a guy by the name of Ross Ulbricht living in an apartment in San Francisco that's a block away from the library where he or the cafe where he logged into the admin panel. And
this all sounds very familiar. Yeah.
That is the, okay, now we know who it is. Now you got to build the case, grab the evidence, and we took off. Yeah. Then we moved fast.
Yeah, and pivoting from that, as I mentioned, that sounds familiar. Frank and I both laugh because the things we're not allowed to talk about are very similar to that, right?
Yep.
Or at least our ops were, and we both have obviously pivoted away from I guess you can call it cybercriminal activity if you want.
I think you mean the fun stuff. The fun stuff. You can call it the fun stuff.
Yeah, we have pivoted away from the fun stuff into the more corporate world, I think, and as have you, and as we get more. What am I trying to say? As the world, as the playing field of the internet kind of gets more and more level, and now we're not looking at cyber criminals just, going after big corporations or specific people, congressmen, congresswomen, state officials. They're going after everybody, right? So with that, how did you make that transition kind of into, or maybe it wasn't even that hard to make the transition into, more of the corporate world and helping out, organizations on that scale. So whether that be consulting or other engagements.
Yeah, Dee, I think when I retired in 2015 and joined the private sector, I didn't know my ass from my elbow on anything business related. Like I didn't. What I did know is how bad guys, what they do, their TTPs, how to how best to defend against them. What kind of action? Just like you guys, I knew the threat side of it.
Right.
I had seen through all my work what worked on the defensive side, what needed a little bit, and it wasn't it wasn't a hard transition in the sense that I had to learn something new. It was like I was going from cybersecurity to learning about reverse mortgages. It was coming to the
very specific example there.
Sorry, that's what I came up with. I don't know why.
Hey, they can be scary too.
They can be scary in a different way.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing was that understanding what the government agencies can do for a private corporation when there's a breach or even just when you need help versus what a private third-party cybersecurity company can do. There's a massive difference between, calling the FBI when you have a breach and what the FBI will do for you, and then calling a company, a private company that does incident response and what they're going to do for you. There's a massive difference. Also, reaching out for an FBI contact and saying, hey, can you give me, can you help with doing an assessment of my environment? FBI is not going to do that for you.
Right.
But a private company sure as hell is going to do that for you. Right. So I came out with thinking that, hey, organizations should call law enforcement when there's an issue, to now understanding when the appropriate time is to bring law enforcement into either a proactive scenario or a reactive scenario. That was the biggest thing. And as far as like transition wise, but I think that, one of the biggest benefits of spending time in the government is really seeing firsthand, from the things that I can't talk about and that you guys can't talk about, knowing really what kind of ownership and damage, a fully funded nation state can do to an organization when they want it. Like, people who don't see that side think they know, but they don't know. You don't know.
Based off of, your answer to the last question, what have you seen CISOs currently kind of underestimating about adversaries, whether it be nation state or criminal?
Yeah, I think a general, there's still a general feeling of, why me? Like, I'm not going to be a target. I have nothing that the bad guys would want.
Yeah.
Number one. And number two is, I just think there is still not enough emphasis on just basic cybersecurity hygiene. And Dustin, we were talking about this before, asset management. Every single client that we talk to, everyone we talk to, rarely do you find an organization today that has an understanding of where all their stuff sits.
Correct. Or what they own, or what they don't own.
And you can't protect it if you can't see it. And I think there's obviously some more complex issues out there, but I truly believe that it's really down to basics. People look to pull the Ferrari out of the driveway before they change the oil in the Honda.
That's a good example.
You don't need, you have to get your house in order before you buy your next tool, your next shiny tool. And I still think there's companies here that are around that don't address the foundational elements first and build upon a weak foundation. And it's really hard to get back down and fix the concrete that's under the ground that you've built. It's tough.
Yeah. And I think that applies to a lot of today's situations. And we've got an example we want to talk to you about. But before we do that, would you say, looking back on your career so far, both, private, because you've got over 10 years of private experience at this point, and your time, serving the FBI. Is there a specific case that still sticks with you, either because of what you uncovered or because it had bigger implications than you thought going into it?
That's a good one. I think the case that I'll always go back to, especially in the cybery world, is our investigation against LulzSec, the splinter cell of Anonymous that we took down.
Cool.
Mainly for the reason that what that case showed us, because we identified Sabu, who was the basically the leader of one of the most active groups. The Anonymous Collective have all these little splinter cells. LulzSec was at the time the most active. And when we were able to not only identify and arrest Sabu and immediately flip him and put him back into play so that we could identify all the other members and arrest the other members of that group, I think even though it was many years ago, it still highlights to me every single day that everything that goes on in these criminal forums and the reason why they're so successful is because they can insulate themselves. But it just shows how you don't know who you don't know. These guys talked every single day forever, but they didn't know his actual identity. And when he started working for the FBI for a year, they had no idea. They had no idea because they'd never met him. They didn't know his real name.
Wow.
And the amount of damage that those guys that we were able to stop, attacks that we were able to stop, went all the way from governments to private organizations. So,
all from flipping one person,
one dude.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And he wasn't in Russia. He wasn't in the Ukraine or Romania. He was in the housing project in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, like 5 minutes from our office.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
That's and to that end, you're able to take those lessons and apply them, and you're seeing a lot of these threat actors evolve over time. And so my question, we're going to bring in for our next question, we're going to bring in a little bit of context, right? Because as we're recording this, it's the 20th. Yeah. So first of all, happy solstice. I thought it was the 21st, but the weatherman today.
Wasn't it last night? Was it?
No, apparently it's like tonight. And I thought it was the 21st, but apparently it's the 20th now, and maybe there's some changes. I don't know. That's completely unrelated to the question. So the other day, June 18th, Cyber News reported what could be the largest credential exposure event in all of history, right? 16 billion login records compiled from 30 databases, primarily sourced from infostealer malware. These included not only usernames and passwords, but session tokens and cookies capable of bypassing MFA. And it also explains a few of the MFA notifications I've received this week.
Me too.
The data was briefly exposed via a misconfigured Elasticsearch and cloud storage. And the structure indicates a significant shift towards centralized repositories in cybercrime. From your experience, law enforcement and private, from anywhere, what does a 16 billion record breach mean in terms of risk and threat modeling? Like, what do we do? Like, it's 16 billion, right? So how do you prepare for this risk? How does this change things?
I don't think it does, because, newsflash, everybody's stuff is out there anyway. Like, it's already available. You can buy for a couple of bucks. You can go into, a forum and buy in a vending machine, in a virtual vending machine, somebody's fulls, name, social security number, date of birth, address. I mean, everything. It's just a couple of bucks. You can do that. I think there's a little bit of fatigue out there, like breach fatigue, because it's happening every single day. I mean, 16 billion is a big number. But, when you step back and look at it, how does it affect an individual and a company, right? When my family or a cousin or something asks about like what they can do to protect themselves from like an identity theft standpoint, I said, there's only one way, and that is to freeze your credit accounts. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, yeah.
Because, obviously you're going to use, multi-factor authentication, all that stuff, that basic practices, but credential stuffing is automated. It's like big machines. One individual, 80-year-old woman trying to protect her account in a nursing home from all of these, spam and calls and texts and everything they're getting and targeted attacks. It's all automated. Like, they're massive machines. And again, back to my previous things that I talked about, it's like basic security hygiene. You have to assume, companies and people have to assume that they're breached, that there's someone in their house. You have to assume, I assume every day that, because I know for a fact that all of my information, my sensitive information, because my SF-86 was stolen, right? Mm-hmm. It's out there.
Ours too.
Yeah. So how do you step back and you say, okay, I read it, but you know what? There's only a couple of things I can do to protect myself, and I'm doing it. That's
right.
it.
Right. I agree.
It's
interesting. Why do you think infostealers have suddenly become so effective? I mean, this shows that they've got a lot, and I at least personally, I wasn't necessarily thinking of them as the main, tools that people would catch. But I don't want to say I feel like it's a comeback. I just feel like we haven't heard about them much lately, and now, it's here.
Yeah, I mean, infostealers is a term that's been coined in the past couple of years, but it's always what they do, right?
It's always,
Financially motivated criminals are looking to pad, to get rich, and what sells? Financial data, PHI, credentials. That's what sells. The 16 billion record that was sold. Whoever took that, maybe not, it's going to make some money. Some of them just put them for free on pay spins.
Yeah.
Like, okay, another massive, just a massive credential breach. But infostealers, are the thing now, because I mean they're more advanced. They can bypass sometimes MFA. They use the credential stuffing, session hijacking. But I think the biggest thing that's different now is that it's automated. It's malware as a service. So somebody who doesn't have any technical background can, for $50 buy a package, read an instruction, launch it, and then if they have a problem, call customer service.
Yeah.
It's a business now. That's the difference. It's the same techniques and the same vectors, phishing, waterhole attacks, all that stuff. But it's just that, a white collar person or somebody who does reverse mortgages for a living.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So with these repositories, right? Do you think we're seeing a shift maybe because Telegram's the big, the big form right now? I keep hearing Telegram, the phrase is the dark web in your pocket, right? Because so much is being done with it. Do you see maybe potentially a shift from Telegram to more centralized repositories? And if so, either way too, I'd like to know your thoughts. Do you think we're entering more of an industrial or commoditized phase of cybercrime, or has, almost as if it's maturing and becoming more organized to an extent?
Well, I definitely think the as a service gets you closer there. The ransomware as a service, the malware as a service. I mean, I saw we had an investigation when I was still in the FBI called against the Black Shades malware, and it was the first time we saw it as a as a service. They basically pushed it out as a legitimate, kind of spyware kit. But it was used for nefarious purposes. But they had guides, they had customer service in multiple different languages. I think the majority of that ecosystem over the next years will get to that.
Okay.
But you're still going to have the very, very, technical folks, the handful of code writers that are sitting over in the former, Republic of the Soviet Union, or actually in Russia to protect themselves from prosecution. They're going to be the big money makers, because they're going to be the guys that are sitting down, putting pen to paper and writing the code that the good guys have to keep up with and stay ahead of.
Yeah.
Or try to stay ahead. That's not going to change. Someone has to write these exploits. And then you get good business people who are putting them together and putting it to market as a service. Yeah. Right?
Dustin and I were talking about that previously. It lines up with that, Dustin, how it's all reactionary. So much of cyber is reactionary because of that too.
Right. And to that end, like, the other thing that we see kind of shifting in cybersecurity is, I guess the businessification. That's not a word, but something along those lines of like cybersecurity, right? So we all run into, different CISOs or leaders within an organization who might be like MBA as a background or something like that. So they understand the business, and they might understand a little bit of the cybersecurity or have their CISSP, which is great. But when you talk about how the adversaries have, these kind of coders on the back end who are the like super technical people, do you feel like we're losing some ground there in that, we do have some highly technical people for sure, and especially in cybersecurity. But do you feel like we're losing an edge a little bit when it comes to the good guys, right? So, us defending organizations or defending infrastructure, as far as being able to kind of keep and to recruit and kind of keep the technical functionalities that we need in order to defeat the technical side on the adversaries.
Yeah, I like you guys, I've always been asked this in my career about, like, are we gonna ever get to neck and neck with the bad guys or even surpass them? I'm a pessimist in this area. I don't think so. Like, I don't. It's especially when our government is cutting back resources in CISA and other and taking away focus of technical investigators and technical analysts, and refocusing them on other investigations, whether that's immigration enforcement or white collar crime, whatever that is. So if you join NSA, CISA, FBI to do cyber, and you do it for a year, and then all of a sudden now you're, trying to help ICE, how long are you going to stay in that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and we, we were just starting to get there before these cuts, where we had people doing R&D and not just being reactive. As a government, as a world, good guys, the blue guys, have to start putting, just like we do in pen tests, right? You have to put the cap on of the bad guy,
right,
and go from their mindset. So we will never ever win against the coders over in Russia who are coming up with the next great thing. If we don't devote the money to do the R&D to figure out what the next great thing is and how we can be adaptable to prevent it before it happens, like, we have to get ahead of them, and we just took steps back from that.
Yeah. So it all comes back to the culture of everything, really. But there's just a cultural shift that's happening right now. And I mean, we talked about this on this podcast ad nauseum about, trying to keep a culture of cybersecurity happening within your organization. But then also, like, there is the culture of the actual culture that you're living in, right? And how valued you are, and also your values, right? So, am I really going to go try to protect, entity A when I don't agree with their politics, or I don't agree with the way that they're going about things?
And isn't that horrible? I mean, that's just such a game. But like, and I talked about it in the beginning, which is pre 9/11 days, Russia was still doing what they're doing. We just didn't know about it. We didn't have the visibility yet. Finally, we start getting this visibility, seeing how they're doing their attacks and how they're coming in. And then all of a sudden we cut funding for it. We don't put that as a priority in our lists of national priorities anymore. And then, we start talking to them like they're not an adversary. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
I like your example there. That time you were talking about there where everything was just getting started. I was watching a speech from General Alexander, former Dernza, who said, when you take the time to actually examine that period of history, right, the mid to late 90s into the early 2000s, especially with Russian cybercrime and everything else over there in Eastern Europe, he said it's probably the greatest transfer of wealth in history, especially the one that nobody knows about. People just don't talk about it. The banks didn't want to talk about it, right? Because they didn't want to look bad, and people didn't, comprehend the size or scale of the problem, let alone the tools used. And yeah, I agree with you. We now, as we're getting to a point where we're really able to get our hands around this a bit better, we've decided not to.
I've heard that the greatest transfer of wealth, referring to what China has done, starting with the theft of the plans for the Joint Strike Fighter, way back when, right? Nobody tracks that. Nobody tracks it. And all of a sudden, like, they steal it, and then 2 years later, they have an aircraft that looks oddly
close,
similar. Shocking.
I part of me wonders, when we talk about these types of incidents and so forth, that they happen so regularly, everyone seems to kind of get a fatigue with it, right? That breach fatigue is becoming more and more real, especially with the massive leaks. It took 16 billion to make headlines in this instance, but so many happen all the time that no one just talks about because it's considered par for the course. Do you think that we as an overall society are just becoming numb to it, and are we suffering as a result from a public awareness kind of standpoint or resilience standpoint?
I think it's a combination, Frank. I think it's yes, there is some fatigue. And number two, it's organizations. There was a point where companies were coming forward more and saying that they had an issue publicly so that others can take lessons from that. But as we're seeing more regulations from the SEC, more stricter requirements about reporting and what is material and what's not, it's going to make organizations go back into their shells, right? So there's absolutely no doubt that breaches and data theft is underreported. It absolutely is. I mean, we see it every day. I mean, rarely do you find an organization that is either not going through something, whether it's a light incident or, just last year had something significant and wants to do some sort of transformation to fix it. It happens. I mean, there's on different scales. And I also think it's, from the kind of the numbness piece is that, companies see so many events every single day, that I think there's a little bit of, confusion about when and if you should classify something from an event to an incident. Like, in my organization, what actually is an incident versus just one of the other 10,000 events that we're seeing. But that also goes back to all the preparedness stuff we were talking about that we don't see as a regular.
This has been great. Dustin, unless you have any more questions, I got one more.
No, you go right ahead.
And we'll end on this because I think it's a really good one for just common sense. If you were in front of a Fortune 500 board today, what would you say about credential and session token risk that most security teams are just underemphasizing? And I want to expand that to just, that's one example and you can speak to it, but what is the biggest concern then overall of what these corporations should be considering? What's their biggest risk? If you want me to just lay it up even better, what's the most important tool they can put in place and why is it MFA? If we want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you just said it, right? It's the we talked about it before, which is the ability to do that credential stuffing and session hijacking. It doesn't make a difference if you have resistant MFA and that's not a text on your phone, that's using an authenticator, a secure authenticator app, right? It's and then it can be just as simple as, shorter live sessions in an organization. But again, I think it just all moves back towards the basics, and MFA is part of the basics. Visibility in your environment and understanding what you have, because if you don't see it, you can't protect it. I mean, it's
awesome.
All
right. Well, thank you so much, Austin. This has been fantastic. We've really enjoyed having you on. We appreciate everyone who listened. Thank you for watching or tuning in. And next week, we hope to meet you again with more guests. Until then, have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Everyone.
Like what you heard or saw? Subscribe to our podcast or visit us on YouTube and give us a like and subscribe.